friends, and welcome back to The Period Feels. We are going to get straight into it, and this episode is actually going to be a little bit unique to our usual format of the Period Feels episodes because it's basically going to be me and our two other team members who are here today talking for the next 30 minutes. So bear with us, but it's going to be a really interesting and thought-provoking one, and one that is really important to us. I'm going to let my co-hosts introduce themselves. First of all, I'm Nadya. I am the co-founder of August, and I'm joined by...
I'm Neddy, the content director at August.
And I'm Davi, the brand designer at August.
And today we're going to be talking about abortion and everything that's happening in the world, which I know for all of us has been really disheartening. And I would love to just start and kind of talk a little bit about the process of putting this episode together. Because, I mean, Neddy, you were one of the first employees at August. And from the very beginning, we weren't super forward about being pro-abortion or pro-choice. Everybody internally was pro-choice. Mm-hmm. But I think we've always been nervous about it, not because we were scared of what people would think, but because we have such a young audience too, right? So I'd love to hear a little bit from you on how are you feeling sitting down and talking about this? What was the thought process of coming here today?
I'm glad that we're finally talking about it. I think people always comment on our social media too, when people ask, oh, do you think they're pro-choice? Of course, look at the content, but I think it's really nice to finally make the step from taking our personal opinions to the brand, because it's one of those things that for a young brand can be a very polarizing opinion, and you don't want to make new customers feel like you're not, you think their lifestyle is wrong, or trying to make people not feel welcomed by a brand. But I think that there's a way to have this conversation in a way where it's very open and it's educational and it's not shooting down anyone's way of life, but it is a very important conversation that needs to be had, especially with the way that things are right now.
Mm-hmm. Last year sometime, we were at a point in the August community where we really wanted it to be bipartisan, and there was actually a little bit of an argument that bubbled up between someone who was vocally very pro-life and, people who obviously took that very personally, right? And I think for us as a brand, all of us are very pro-choice, but I think we were at a point in the brand where we were how do we create a bipartisan space that can really hold conversation and open learning about this? And I do believe in that, bipartisan community building bridges sort of thing. But to Neddy's point, we've kind of come to a point in the world where I think anybody with a platform really needs to take a stance on this. Obviously, the Supreme Court draft opinion was leaked, I believe last week, mm-hmm. where it was overturning Roe V. Wade, which would basically mean that the constitutional right to have an abortion would be taken away. And obviously that is something that we find very embarrassing for the country. We, are upset by, and previously we all held those beliefs very personally. But, I think through the conversations over the last week, it was okay, no, we have a platform and we have a responsibility to take a stand on it because it is our rights that are, at hand. Davi, you, I believe, are the only person on the team, at least who has shared publicly the experience of having an abortion.
Yeah.
And so I'd love maybe for you to talk a little bit about what your experience was, but also, what do you think brands should do in this space? What is the responsibility of a brand at this moment?
Okay, so to answer first my experience, so I was 20 years old when I first had my abortion, and that experience was wild. At the time, I was new to college. I just moved out of my mom's house. I just started being sexually active, so it was all at once, and I was just going through hell at the time, so it was just an added thing on top of that. So I lost my virginity to this guy, and we had unprotected. I literally had sex with him maybe 5 times. Am I getting too deep?
No.
Okay, I thought about it.
No such thing as TMI here.
So we had sex 5 times, and the last time was unprotected. I come from a household where my mom never really explained sex in the act. It was very much just don't do it. Just don't do it. You end up pregnant kind of thing. And so a lot of the things. Even this is hard to believe, I just didn't know. It's just what it was. So in my mind, I was nothing happened. We're good. I didn't see anything, I didn't feel anything, so I'm out. So I didn't consent to him finishing inside me. So
red flag, by the way, for those
100%. And he was someone I was seeing casually. It wasn't a boyfriend or anything. So it just didn't make sense for me. So I usually get my period at the beginning of the month, and if not, a few days later. So I realized that week, it just didn't come, and I was like, fuck. I was like, oh my God, my period didn't come. But I was like, oh, like, everybody, you know, has like their myths. Hormones change when you lose your virginity and like this, that, and the third. So like, maybe that's what it is. So I was like, yeah, we'll give it some time. Another week passes, no period. And then another week passes. And that's when I was like, okay, so I'm like concerned, right? My first initial thought wasn't like I'm pregnant. I was just like still like something is wrong with my hormones, right? So I tell my friend, I'm like, girl, like my period didn't come, like I don't know what's happening to me. And she's like, well, why didn't you tell me? Like we would have just like gone you a test, whatever. So I kind of ignored it, not gonna lie. And then one day I'm like going to meet her at work, and I just have like an unnecessary attitude for everything. I'm just like pissed. Like I'm always pissed. I'm like, what is wrong with me? This is not me. Like she would ask me for something and I would just be mad, or someone would ask to share food and I'd be so greedy, and I'm like, this isn't like me. So I was like, I'm gonna get a pregnancy test because something is off. So she picks up a pregnancy test. It comes out positive, and I'm just like breaking down. And the first thing I'm thinking is like, oh my God, I have to carry this full term. Like, how am I gonna be able to have a child? Like all these things. And the second thing was like, I can't tell my mom. Like I don't, like she's gonna freak out on me. Like what am I gonna do? So my friend, luckily, her mom, like the stars align. Her mom is a woman's health doctor. So like she instantly knew what to do. She was like looking up Planned Parenthood. She was Googling all the clinics. She was like, girl, we're gonna get you this abortion. Like having this child is not for you. It's not an option. We're gonna hook you up. So so she found all the clinics, and then we found one which was about like, I want to say 2.5 hours from my college campus. So that was already like, damn, I don't have a car, I don't drive, like how am I gonna get there kind of thing. So luckily she helped me and her boyfriend, they drove me, and when we get there, they had me fill out all this paperwork, all these things, and they tell me, please come into this room, drop your underwear, and the doctor will come in. So I'm like on this stirrups, and I'm like, first of all, I've only had sex 5 times. I've never had a gynecologist visit, like any of these things. So I'm just sitting there, and the whole time I'm like, oh my God.
This is your first gyno ever?
Ever. Like this is my experience. I've never been to the gyno at the time. Like it's just like, there's just like a lot of things that like when I was growing up were never taught to me. Like it just wasn't what I knew. Like, and I was very sheltered, so like I never was allowed to go out. Didn't have a lot of friends that like would tell me stuff, so those things, etc. So I get to there, and I'm in the stirrup, I'm like this little like sundress, and I'm laying down and I'm freaking out. And the nurse is like, don't worry, like the doctor's gonna come, you're gonna be fine, all these things. Comes in, and it's like a horror film. He like snaps on the glove, and he's like, ring, and he's like inside, and he's like pressing, trying to like feel something, and I'm like, okay, all right, whatever. He's like in there, all the nurses are looking, and then she's like, cool, we're just gonna take your ultrasound, and we're gonna see like where are you at, because they asked me how long was it that I didn't have my period, and I was like, I calculated about 6 weeks. And she was like, okay, cool. So she does ultrasound, all this stuff, and she's like, so I got some news for you. And I was like, fuck. She's like, so I can't find anything. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm not pregnant, like awesome. Wow. She's like, we can't find it, you can't see anything. And I was like, okay. She's like, but you took a test and it was positive? I was like, yeah, I took 2. She was like, okay. She was like, so there's a chance that you have an ectopic pregnancy. And I was like, oh, so it's not that it's not there, it's just in my fallopian tubes growing in this little like, and I was just sitting there, and I was like, I'm laughing now from the nurse, but it was like my brain was like I was like, I'm pregnant, but now it's in my fallopian tubes. Like, what the fuck, right? So she's like,
those are dangerous.
I was gonna say, do you have to get an abortion?
You have to get
anyway?
surgery. Oh, so that's what she told me. She was like, if it's in there, she's like, if you calculate it correctly and it's in your tubes, like we're gonna cut you open and get it out, because like it can't grow there. Yeah. So I was like, oh my God, like so now I'm freaking out again. So like if I have surgery, like this is way further than I even like thought of. Let me know if I'm running on too much.
No, go.
So yeah, so she's like, you're having a topic, whatever. So she's like, what we're gonna do is we're gonna draw some blood for you, and we're gonna test whatever levels of whatever, and if we see that it's multiplying, we're seeing that you actually have growth and that you actually are pregnant. So I was like, cool. I come back like a week later. She's like, luckily you just miscalculated. And I was like, okay, cool. Like still pregnant though, right? She's like, yeah. And I was like, great. So what are we gonna do now? Because girl, I'm not doing this. Like, what are we like? And she's just like, okay, so you have 2 options. Like, she's like, right now, since you're so early on, we can't do anything, so we have to wait. And she's like, but you want to wait within, she says 6 to 9 weeks, I can do the pill form. Like there's 2, like the one invasive one, and there's like the pill form. So I was like, great. She's like, come back. I think it was like, I was like 4 weeks, so I had to come back 2 weeks later. So I come back 2 weeks later, and she's like, okay, cool. So you're going to sign this waiver, and it's $400 to do it. Yeah, it's $400. I had school insurance. All it covered was my blood work. It didn't cover an abortion. I don't even think any insurance, I'm not mistaken, I don't think insurance covers that. I'm not sure, but mine didn't. So I was like, fuck. And I'm like 20 years old. I don't have any money. Like, so I'm like, okay, so $400. All right, cool. So, wait, sorry, I messed up the story. $400 before I signed the waiver and did the bill. So it was like one visit and then another visit. So the first visit, she told me it's $400. And then, so the guy that I was seeing at the time, he didn't know anything, and I was just like, I don't want to tell him. I kind of want to handle it on my own. Strong, independent bullshit. And I was like, all right. So we go on a date, and he sees on my phone that Planned Parenthood was like searched. Like I was looking for the GPS, and he sees it. He's like, "You have something to tell me?" And I was like, "Fuck." I was like, no. He's like, "Are you pregnant?" And I was like, "Yeah." So he's just like quiet. He's like, "So what are you gonna do?" And I was like, "Don't worry about it. Like I'm gonna handle it. Like it's all good." And he's like, "So you're gonna get an abortion?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "I don't want you to." And I was like, what? And I was sitting there and I'm like, is he being for real or is he kidding? Like when I tell you casually, we were just hooking up. There was no goal to do anything, like to be in a relationship, married, all this bullshit. He was a little bit older than me, so he starts making that point. He's like, I'm a little bit older, like I'm ready to be a father. And I'm just like, I'm looking at him and I'm like, is he dead ass right now? Like he's dead ass. He's looking at me in my eyes like, please keep till full term. And I was like, that's not an option. He's like, I was almost aborted, and like, had my mom aborted me, like I wouldn't be here. I was like, had your mom aborted you, you wouldn't have known you was gonna be aborted. Like I just went off. I was off in the car.
You have told us this story like 3 times, and you left out
all of it. So like I had to think about it this morning. I told my best friend, I was like, girl, I had to talk about it in the podcast, and I was like, I missed a lot of details because I was like, I kind of just like threw that shit in like the files, So he tells me that we're on the way to like some fun zone place to do go-karting, and I'm just arguing with him in the car, and I'm like, I'm not ready to be a mom. We're not in a relationship. Neither of us have a steady home. Neither of us have steady finances. Like, what are you thinking? He had the audacity to ask me. He was like, can you just carry it full term and just give me the child? That's what he said to me. And I was like, so you want me to go and put myself through 9 months of a pregnancy that I don't even want, which makes it sound like it's like Amazon, you just deliver and pick up kids, like that's how it works, and then you want me to give this to you and then just bounce. Like you make it sound very 1, 2, 3. I'm like, this is not happening. It's not an option. So yeah, that was it. So he was like, all right, cool. And then the next day he was like, oh, I'm gonna help you. Like, let me know how much it is. So I found out it's $400 back to the clinic, and I tell him just to like kind of keep him informed. I knew I didn't really expect his help. I was just like, I'm gonna handle this because obviously you're not even supportive. So he's like, no, I'll help you cover the charges. I'm gonna drive you to the clinic. Never gave me a dime. Never drove me to nothing. Ghosted me, and it was just like whatever until the end. Till I told him that it was over. So yeah, so my friend lends me the money. I pick up extra shifts and I go get the abortion. So what you do is like they sit you down and they like give you a rundown of all the side effects, like a little room, and they're like, are you sure it's what we want to do? Like kind of like all that stuff. I was like, yep, give me the pills, pop it in my mouth, and I was like, all right, cool, like now it feels real. Like I'm like, okay, this is gonna be like something that I'm doing, and it kind of hit me, and I wasn't like upset about it in that like morally I was like, this is wrong. I was just like, I can't believe this is something that I have to do because like whatever, right? So it's happening to me, right? You know, no one ever thinks it's gonna be them, right? So yeah, so she gives me the pills, and she's like, so when you get home, you're gonna need a really heavy like pad or diaper or something, so that because you're gonna bleed a lot. So she's like, when you get home, I'd rather you do it when you sleep because the pain is so excruciating that it's gonna wake you up. So it's better that you're in deep sleep than like you're just like up chilling. So she gave me like a little envelope and had like 4 other pills, I think. And then she's like, you're going to insert it in your vagina, and then you're going to go to bed. So I did that. I get home, and this is like the end of the semester, so everyone's moved out, and I'm just hiding in the dorm because I can't go home. I can't show my mom like it's happening. So that day, my dad's a cab driver, and he works for the city, so he was crossing someone into where I was going to school, the city I was going to school, and I was like calling him, I was like, please, can you pick up pads? Like my period's so heavy, blah, 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 blah. He luckily went and picked it up for me, and like it was like a pad like this big and this. It was almost like a night pad to pee.
Like a diaper.
That's honestly, it was a diaper. That's a happy accident, though, that dads don't know what to buy in this scenario.
Yeah. It was perfect. He was like, big, okay, we're going huge. So he got like, the pad was like this big. Like, it was, I want to say, like the size of like a sandwich. Like it was
a foot long sandwich.
Yeah, it was huge, and then it was thick, and then it had like little wings. And I was like, okay, cool, Dad, thanks, blah blah blah. Meanwhile, whole abortion tonight, not telling him. So everyone's out, but my roommate got, luckily she was, which I'm very thankful for if you're listening. She was taking summer classes, so I was luckily able to stay in the dorm with her. They didn't like move or anything. So she's like, you just stay with me, like tell your parents school hasn't ended and you'll be fine. So I go to bed and then I put on this pad, whatever, I put him in and I go to sleep. And like at 3 in the morning, I wake up and it's like the most excruciating pain I've ever experienced in my stomach and like kind of by like, I guess it's your uterus area. And it was just like, it feels like, it literally, without exaggeration, feels like someone's like cutting you out. Like it feels like you're stabbing like the whatever out. We used to call it Fee, like because it wasn't a fetus, we call it her Fee. And we was like, we're evacuating Fee. But
you had a party,
yeah, I had a whole
yeah.
party and everything, but you know. So yeah, so I was like, oh my god, like, and I could feel all the blood like coming out. So like she's like, the doctor, I remember she said, go to the bathroom, and then like once you see like a little thing, like a whatever in the toilet, then you know it's done. So I go to the bathroom and I sit on the toilet and like I just feel the blood dripping and dripping, dripping. This was like half an hour, just dripping, dripping, dripping. And I was like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. I'm like, is it done? Is it done? Is it done? So I get up. The pain like subsides a little bit. It still feels like something, but it's just like enough where you're like, okay, maybe something is ready. So I look in the toilet and it's like this little, it's like a jelly. It's like gelatiny and it's like red and like it looks
like a blood clot.
Yeah, but it's huge. Like it's not huge, but compared to like what I normally experience from a period, it was like big. And I was like, okay, like it's done. So I just went to bed and like I just cried and I was like, okay, it's over. Like finally, I'll be fine. Whatever. Next day, I called the guy, told him it's over. He was like, cool, 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 and like we never spoke again. And that was like my experience. And I didn't tell my parents. Like a year later, I moved back home because I couldn't afford to be in school anymore. And like all my classes I failed, my job I quit. Like it was just not, it was like also I was dealing with other family things. So it was just like a whole combination. And yeah, then I went home and like, it was that like, it just never happened. Like it was just like, yeah. But that was my experience. Sorry.
Wait, do they not give anything for the pain too? That's something I thought that they would do.
No, she never gave me like nothing. She didn't tell me to take any ibuprofen or Tylenol. Nothing. She was just like, this is gonna hurt, and I was like, cool. And I was like, but is it gonna be done? And then you're supposed to like go back and get checked and everything, but I couldn't afford to go for a visit, and I couldn't afford to drive over. It was like a lot of things, so I kind of just assumed it was over. But there are cases that she was telling me that sometimes it doesn't work. Like that step doesn't work, and you have to go to like the next step, which is like the invasive one. Yeah. But yeah.
I think it's so powerful for you to share like your story because a lot of the discussion happening out there is, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. Like how many people actually have an abortion? Yeah. And the numbers are actually insane. It's like 25% of women will get an abortion or have had an abortion. And like I remember kind of studying for this and just reading through all of the different stats. And I mean, there's already so many anti-abortion restrictions that have already been put in place. I was reading that last year in 2021, 600 different abortion restriction laws were introduced and 100 of them were put into effect. Wow. And even when I was listening to your story, it was like honestly like personifying a lot of the laws that we read about into like an actual story, right? So a lot of the abortion restrictions are about banning abortion after 6 weeks, which is really problematic because a lot of people, even in your case, right, you realize that you're pregnant after you miss your period after a couple of weeks. So if you believe that, oh, I'm 6-7 weeks after my last period, it could mean that you are no longer eligible for an abortion, right?
Wait, hold up. So it's after 6 weeks. You literally just told us in that story that she said, come back because I can't do anything.
Exactly.
So what's there's just no...
So basically that's why the abortion restriction of even with Roe v. Wade, you know, in place or not in place, all these abortion restrictions that are banning it past 6 weeks are effectively banning abortion. And so it's like, I think that's a really important piece to note, which is like beyond Roe v. Wade, there's so many other angles of this. And then also I know something we were talking about before, which is just the element of how, you know, abortion restrictions, but also something like overturning Roe v. Wade is absolutely insane around how it affects marginalized communities more, or people who don't have the financial means to travel to another state, to afford the health care, to afford the treatment, to, you know, even also have the education on like what does it mean to get an abortion and all of those things. So I mean, I just think, I know something you talked about previously outside of this podcast too, Davi, is just like in your mind feeling like you weren't financially ready to have a child.
Yeah.
Right. And like, what would your life look like? How old would Fee be?
Fee would have been like 4 or 5 now.
Right now?
Like, actually, this is like around the time of my abortion anniversary, I want to say. Like, April, May was the time. But yeah, like, that was... Wait, what was your question again? Sorry.
Just like not being in the financial place.
So financial... Like, I knew... This is I feel like one of the misconceptions that bothers me the most is like, oh, they just like this selfish people, just like think about themselves. I've always wanted to be a mom. I know I'm one of those people, like, I do want to have a kid, but when I'm ready, and I feel like at the time I was like, what? I can't even afford to eat like for lunch today. Like, I can't I can't afford to go to school. Like, there's a lot of things that I was like, I didn't have the financial stability, which is like the main thing that was an issue for me. But I just I wasn't mature enough. I was like, I'm 20 years old. How am I gonna raise a child? Like, this is not something that I'm capable of mentally. It's not something I'm capable of financially. Like, it was just like a lot of those things. But yeah, like, it was just like that was like the main concern for me. Like, I was like, if I carry this child full term, what life would it have at the end? Well, not child, but like, if I finish this pregnancy, then like, what would that be? And that was my biggest fear. And I always knew I wanted to be a mom at, like, in my 30s, when I was like, and I was like, that's when I feel like I was a little bit more mentally stable, financially, etc. But yeah, I wouldn't be here today at August. I would be at home with Fee. Yeah, literally. So I didn't even finish school. Like, it was just like a lot of things that were like in ripple effect of the abortion. So imagine if I would have done like the actual full process of a pregnancy. That was not an option.
Yeah. I think also, like, I was reading about, let's talk about the history of what's happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I also, in brushing up in my own knowledge and, like, recognizing, like, how little I was taught in school about this, right? Like, of course, we learned about Supreme Court cases, and I remember there being, like, a unit in social studies where you like learn about the Supreme Court cases and like the pivotal ones, and it was like Brown versus Board of Education, which is about desegregation, and then there was also like Roe v. Wade, and it was like just a little thing on a quiz, but we don't actually learn like the details of it. So in case y'all didn't listen to the New York Times Daily podcast series, which I felt was super helpful, I brushed up on some knowledge, which is that the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court case is a 1973 Supreme Court case. Roe, Jane Roe, is the anonymous name for the woman in this scenario. Her real name is Norma McCorvey, and she, had definitely like the troubled past, like an alcoholic mom, was kind of traveling, had one, pregnancy, an unexpected pregnancy, carried it out, had a second one, gave up to adoption, and then a third, got pregnant, and then did not want to carry out that pregnancy. And she ended up being brought on by a few lawyers who were looking for a case as well to like help her get an abortion, and also, be this Jane Roe in the case that was going to help, legalize abortion. Because also of time restrictions and lack of financial support, she did not end up getting that abortion.
Wow.
Yeah. So even in the Roe v. Wade case, she did not get that abortion. It was put up, the child was put up for adoption. Wow. And then for like the next, I think, few decades, Norma McCorvey is, this pivotal face of the pro-abortion movement. However, I forget the exact timeline. A few, like maybe in the last decade or so, she's working at like an abortion clinic and ends up befriending an anti-abortion protester who's like a pastor, very religious leader. And he ends up converting her to the Catholicism, baptizes her. She becomes the face of the pro-life movement. What? And so Norma McCorvey, who is the OG Jane Roe, ends up becoming this face of, I'm a born-again Christian, and this is the biggest mistake of my life, and becomes then a figure in the pro-life movement against her own situation. And a lot of her messages, I was used by the pro-choice movement and all these things. Wow. So it was this crazy history where I was reading it like, this is insane. Like, I never learned any of this. Like, there is a lot of pushback around how progressives, Democrats, even today, we veer away from saying the word abortion, right? And we say pro-choice, and by doing that, we're setting up even the kind of weird conclusion that this isn't an ideal thing to do, right? This is a last resort choice. It's not the right thing to do, but it's the thing you do out of desperation. It's the choice to be able to do this, rather than being like, we are pro-abortion. We are pro-celebrating when someone has the option to do this. And so that's where I was like, even coming into this conversation, it was like, I feel like I've done all this unlearning in the last week. I had no idea who Norma McCorvey was. And I had always said pro-choice. And here I am being like so excited that we're like saying abortion, being like pro-abortion. And I think that it's something where it's like, kind of taking it back to August too, is like, what is the role of a brand that has this, right? Like we have this audience of young menstruators, like people with uteruses. And by the way, like the link to pregnancy is very real when you get your first period, because that is when you can then conceive children. And it's like, okay, what is the role of education, but also like, where do we go from here, right? Do we think that Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned? Probably, right? Like that draft opinion comes out. Is that really going to change? Like probably. And like, what is the result of that? You know, low-income women, people with uteruses are going to be more heavily impacted. We see a resurgence of confidence in this like moral high ground of like right-wing conservatives around being pro-life and like what that even means, which is like very much not backed by science and like what a fetus is. And I think that, again, it's like very linked to like everything we talk about with period poverty and education. So yeah, I'd love to hear your reactions, especially Neddy, from you, who like did not ever take U.S. history.
Actually, yeah, this is all news to me personally. I didn't grow up in the U.S., so I just kind of missed the whole U.S. history part of things. But I was gonna say there's a lot of parallels between what you were just talking about and like how you're not doing any favors by not saying pro-abortion, and like historically brands are always gonna give you a kind of media trained PR response of like not answering the question at all. But it's kind of nice to see that brands now aren't doing that and are aligning themselves with things that they believe in, and it's not going to push away. Like a lot of brands will give you this PR trained little answer because they don't want to polarize their audience, they don't want to chase away customers, but we get to say, also because we're so small, we get to talk about it and decide what we care about and say, this is what we're going to support. We are pro-abortion, and if you don't like it, then you can go buy from somewhere else. And I don't know, I think with the way that we talk about sustainability, we talk about like everything, it's like, here's our beliefs, and if you subscribe to August, you have to subscribe to those too. Otherwise, you can go somewhere else.
And I think that like this podcast, I also think is recognizing that like brand positions can change, right? And it's important to celebrate those changes, because having us sit on a podcast as like, honestly, like leaders of a team at a brand saying, oh, we're changing to be pro-abortion. And I'm not saying like, I think all of us individually were, but like we weren't coming out and saying that for the longest time, because our position a year ago was we're creating a bipartisan space where everybody, regardless of where they are in their unlearning or learning journey, is coming together. And I think at the moment, you know, maybe we took our, honestly, like in many ways, like I recognize like my own privilege of being like, okay, actually kind of going back to Davi, what you were saying is like, I grew up knowing very well everything about use a condom, don't use a condom. And I actively chose not to use a condom for 8 years of being sexually active. I was like on birth control, or I was like, pull out method. But also like, I think I always took for granted, of course I'll get an abortion, right? Like if I'm pregnant, I'll just get an abortion. And I never thought about how painful it would be, the emotional consequences. I would just be like, I've grown up in a very liberal, progressive space where it's a no-brainer. I'm not going to use a condom because, you know, he says it feels better. And we'll just drive over and, you know, get an abortion, you know, done.
Or plan B or something like that. Plan B. That's something that, like, it's so wild, because I feel like a lot of people are like, yeah, but you were 20. How did you not know? I was like, I'm telling you, like, me dorming was, like, my escape from my house, but I was not allowed to be outside. Dating was, like it just, a lot of those strict things, a lot of those, like, conservative. Like, my mom's not really conservative, but in that area, I want to say she is. So, like, she just never really explained stuff. It was always, like, scare tactics. It was always very much, like, you're gonna end up pregnant and that's bad, and you're gonna don't have sex with a guy because that's bad. It was just like always that's bad. Never like, but if you end up doing this is what you can do, what you can use. It was never like that, for at least for the girls in my family. It was my brother, probably opposite. Don't get a girl pregnant, like, you know. So I think that I like abortion, plan B, even sex was like not something that I was like, oh, that's gonna happen for me. Like I was just like, I'm one of those people that doesn't. So when I got to school, like all my information was from my friends, and like my friends were like, do this, use that, don't do this, don't do that. But then even then they still wouldn't explain like specific things that happen, like literal, like step by step, like when he does this, this will happen, and that then you will look, and it will look like this, and it will feel like this. No one ever told me. So like in my mind, I'm like, okay, we're done having sex, like nothing happened, I guess nothing happened or whatever. So like those things. So I think that like for me it was just like nothing. There was like nothing in my brain for this until it happened, and then when it did happen, I was like, oh fuck.
I also don't know a single menstruator who hasn't had a pregnancy scare or like know someone. Like I think everybody's always been late for their period. I've taken so many pregnancy tests. I've bought so many pregnancy tests for my sisters.
Yeah.
Like, none of us ever turned out to be pregnant, but it was like, I think honestly that's why we're sitting here today, because it's like, even in my mind, it was always a no-brainer. If I get pregnant, I don't have to have protective sex because I'll just get an abortion. And now, like, we're at a moment where it's like, holy fuck, like, no, that right is being taken away and just becoming more and more difficult. But more than that, I think that there's more societal shame around it, right? Like, if our country, our Supreme Court of the United States kind of sides with this quote unquote moral high ground, it adds to the societal shame around what it means to get an abortion. And I think that's where we are taking the step as a brand to like change our position and be like, you know, we were previously all personally coming forward as pro-choice. And now it's like, no, we as a brand, like, we have a platform, we have a circle of young menstruators, and there is so much education needed. And so this is our stance now. So anyways, that's all we're wrapped today. We could talk about this forever.
Oh, hell yeah. I'm like sitting here with like
so many questions. This is definitely going to be a conversation we're going to continue to. And as you know, we have our inner cycle with August. You can join on our website. And so we hope that this is a continued discussion. And like, maybe when this episode comes out, we can do like a little live chat or something, because I know that there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of people out there who are just learning about what abortion is for the first time, which I'm getting a lot of questions about on my social media. So we will continue this conversation. Please ask us your questions and we will chat soon.